Less than you can, all that you should. I'm not typically one for credos, for bumper sticker mission statements that encapsulate how we're to walk in the world. I've always felt that Jewish tradition's strength is in its complexity, even its contradictions and paradoxes. And yet, I think in this moment we need simplicity without being simplistic. This year, 5779, is the year to find a good mantra and to stick to it. And what kind of a year has the previous year been? Have any of you seen the TV version of Fargo? There's a great scene in the first season when Billy Bob Thornton's character is buying substantial quantities of Adderall out of the back of a van, and the drug dealer is trying to upsell him a zombie preparedness kit. Quote, just in case of a zombie apocalypse and it all becomes dog eat dog, you know. And Thornton's character, deadpan, responds, it's already dog eat dog, friend. I'm not sure what worse a bunch of zombies could do. So in a world somewhere between dog eat dog and zombie apocalypse, we need values, lessons, a good credo to hold on to, not cliches, not kumbaya, something elegant and pointed and real. Jane Addams, reflecting on her 20 years of work with Hull House, said people did not want to hear about simple things, they wanted to hear about great things simply told. So here's my mantra this year: less than you can, all that you should. A better year, a better world means us taking less than we can, but all that we should. Notice I didn't say giving all that we should. That's also true, but that's a different sermon. Today I want to talk about justice. Not abstractly, not a vague concept we call tikkun olam, but a concrete mission statement that can inform how each of us, in countless contexts, big and small, might increase equity and fairness, godliness, and love. I'm talking about justice in our homes and in our relationships, justice in our schools and urban institutions, justice in our country and in our world. Less than you can, all that you should. In Parashat Shoftim, which we read in Shul a few weeks ago, the Torah includes the famous command, tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. What does this mean? Why the repetition of the word justice? Is it pursue justice emphatically? Is it about the elusive nature of justice, how it can be pursued but rarely achieved? Another interpretation is that tzedek, tzedek tirdof means pursue justice justly, which is to say, justice achieved through questionable means can actually be unjust. How does this work? Perhaps the best way to think about it is to consider the parameters of justice. What are its boundaries? And then understanding them, how can we determine what's within them? And also what's beyond those parameters? There's a concept in halakha that has always baffled me. The concept is called lifnim meshurat hadin, which is usually translated as beyond the letter of the law. I'll give you an example. The Mishnah, the 2nd century rabbinic text, in Tractate Bava Metzia, establishes a prioritization of lost and found objects. If you find your own lost object and also your father's or your teacher's, your own property takes precedence. Your stuff comes first, even if you never get to the other person's stuff. But in the Gemara, it actually gets quite interesting. Addressing poverty, says the rabbis, means you must first ensure that you yourself don't become poor. That's why Deuteronomy says, Ki lo yiyevecha evyon, there should be no poor with you. It's one thing to put yourself before your teacher or even your parent who have status but presumably also have means. But what about a homeless person? What about someone who doesn't have much to call his own? Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav that anyone who fastidiously fulfills this principle at the expense of a poor person will ultimately come to experience his fate. Paradoxically, saving yourself from poverty will lead to experiencing poverty. And why is this? Rashi explains, even though the Torah does not place the obligation of a poor person first upon him, a person should go lifnim meshurat hadin, beyond the letter of the law. So everyone with me, the Torah, as the Mishnah understands it, says protect yourself and then protect others. The Talmud says that's true, but you need to protect others too in order to protect yourself, especially if they're poor people. And Rashi explains, it seems, this is because the law itself is insufficient. You have to go beyond the letter of the law. But here's the problem. What does it say about halakha to claim that it's not enough? Or worse, that it's fundamentally unjust, that you need to do more than the law, better than the law, to meet justice in society? And principally, what does that say about God? And one final problem. This approach, I would suggest, plays right into classic Christian antinomianism, where the law is flawed and the goal of righteous living is in fact to transcend the law in favor of the Spirit, to be better than what that Old Testament God expects, by being magnanimous and generous and kind. Jews, I think, I would humbly suggest, can be all of those things well within the boundaries of our tradition. Thank you very much. We can be generous, and yes, we can be selfish too. Be unique, reads an actual bumper sticker I once saw, just like everybody else. And this is my point. The parameters of justice are not the totality of justice, just like an orange is more than its peel. And that's good. Because guess what? Lifnim meshurat hadin doesn't actually mean beyond the letter of the law. It's a mistranslation. Raise your hand if you've read or seen The Merchant of Venice at some point. Right? When Portia tries to convince Shylock of the value of mercy in that famous scene in Act 4, Shylock rejects her plea because he represents that caricature of Jewishness, the one that fetishizes vengeance, the impulse to exact a pound of flesh. But that's not who we are. Many of you know Hebrew reasonably well. Listen carefully to the words, lifnim meshurat hadin. Din is justice or judgment, a concept as elusive as it is clear. What is shura? Have you heard that term before? How about at a graveside? A shura, in a funeral context, is a receiving line. Shura literally means line. In our case, it's the line around a point, sometimes called a circle. It's the line of the law, the boundaries, the parameters of justice. Each of us exists within an imaginary circle, our circle of justice. And our family has its own circle, and our synagogue has its own, and Baltimore and Maryland and the United States, each entity has a different set of norms that contain and constrain it. That line is what we are due, what we are fully entitled to under those set of norms, rules, or laws. When I drive my car, by law I may go. I don't have to, but I may. If I go 55, though, I know, because I'm from Illinois, not Maryland, that I should drive in the right lane so that those who exercise their right to drive faster can pass me. I'm still bitter because the Bears lost last night. To the Packers, no less. We all exist within that circle called a speed limit. And each of us chooses how much of that space we claim, how close to the line we come. Now, listen carefully. Beyond the letter or line of the law would be speeding. which again, for Chicagoans, is an inherent good, sort of like vote is called illegal. Right? To go beyond the letter of the law is to violate it. It's to abrogate the law, not to follow it, not to do better than it. We have a word for that, for going beyond the letter of the law too, in Hebrew, and we use it a lot this time of year. The word is aveirah, sinning, quite literally crossing the line. And here's the kicker. Meshurat hadin is the line or circle of justice. What's lifnim? Like its modern equivalent bifnim, lifnim means within. Lifnim meshurat hadin means within the circle of what we're due, what we're entitled to, less than you can. When Rashi talks about why it's nasty to claim own lost property at the expense of poor people, he's saying that that is justice pursued unjustly. Sure, you're entitled to do it, but what sort of society are you perpetuating when you do? Christine Hayes at Yale, who has written on this subject, describes the following scene. You're standing in line at the airport. You're desperately late for your flight, so you go up to the person at the front of the line and you say, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm late for my flight. Could I please go ahead of you?" Anyone ever been there? And the person at the front of the line says, perhaps politely, "Well, I'm really sorry, but you see, I was here first." And you say, because you know if 28 people have to pass through that metal detector before you, there's just no way that you're making your flight. "I know you were here first, but I see from your ticket that your flight isn't for an hour and mine is in 17 minutes. And the person in line says, "Then perhaps you should have arrived sooner." Now, is the jerk at the front of the line right? Yes. Right? The rule is that if you're there first, you go first. She is within her line of the law. She's within the boundaries of strict justice. But I hope we can all agree it would be better if she would adjust a bit, contract her ego, for others, to take a step back from the line, literally and figuratively, to make room for justice claimed, or not claimed, but shared. Perhaps it's a trite example, but maybe not. Because maybe you're late because you stopped to help a homeless woman find her lost handbag. Or because you got into a big fight with your spouse and you needed to work things out before you left. And maybe if you miss your flight, you'll be late for your grandson's college graduation or your sister's surgery. The point is, within our circle of justice is also the circle of our lives. And when we selfishly claim more than we need, more than we should, in a world of limited resources, we appropriate things, time and money and access from those who also need them. How can this sort of behavior affect a city, a society? The Gemara tells us Jerusalem was destroyed because people judged according to din haTorah, the strict law of the Torah. Because they established their judgments on din haTorah rather than lifnim meshurat hadin, stopping short of them. The Talmud makes the audacious and fascinating claim that Jerusalem, not just any city, but the city of cities, the center of Jewish gravity, perhaps the center of the universe, is destroyed because too many people decided to claim all that they could instead of making space for others. Less than you can, all that you should. In the modern Musar movement, they put it this way: no more than my space, no less than my place. Which brings me to my second part of the 5779 bumper sticker mantra, all that you should. Now, people with power and access are good at taking all that they can, which is not always, but too often more than they should. But taking less than you can is only half of the equation, because societies aren't made whole through paternalism, by only the ones with privilege and resources contracting within their circles. It requires a partnership, a contracting by some and an expanding by others. Some call this restorative justice. For example, it wasn't men who made women's suffrage possible in 1920, as Betham's own Elaine Weiss explains in her wonderful new book, The Woman's Hour. It was women and male allies who worked with them. It wasn't the police or the administration in Washington who brought about the beginning of police reform in Baltimore through the consent decree. It was African American protesters and those who told their stories of injustice, and those who stood with them shoulder to shoulder and testified with them who did that. And it's immigrants who talk about being separated from their children, and women who say enough of being overlooked and underpaid and objectified, and teenagers who say they've simply had enough of gun violence in their schools. And it wasn't the British or even the United Nations who made the State of Israel. It was the Jewish people who did that through hundreds of years of prayers and decades of investment and relationships with those who denied and supported our claim. It was the men and women who fought and died 70 years ago this year, and the Palmach before them, and the IDF since, who made and make the Jewish state a reality. And what about the Evyon V'cha, the poor with you? That's why giving in Jewish tradition is called tzedakah, justice, as in tzedek, tzedek. Because it's not charity, not something that we do out of the goodness of our hearts, but a necessity, a necessary contracting within means, our circles, to provide some of that which we have earned to those who are deserving simply because, well, they're human beings too. They ask for our help, they stake their claim, we relinquish our grasp, less than you can, all that you should. The Toldot Yitzchak, Rabbi Isaac of Rabbi Yosef Karo, explains when Devarim says the poor with you, it means you are the reason that she is poor. Chavra, this is Rosh Hashanah, but another name for Rosh Hashanah that we find in the Machzor is Yom Hadin, Day of Justice. This year, on this very first day of the year, let's consider the true nature of justice. I knew I should have brought my telescope. What sort of communities do we want to work toward this year? What kind of nation do we want to support this year? What sort of world? The world that in our mythical tradition came into being 5,779 years ago. What sort of world do we want to pass along to the next generation? On the high holy days, we pray to our Creator. We pray a lot. And while praying, what do you think God is doing? Listening, hopefully, but maybe something else too. One final Talmudic teaching. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, from where do we know that the Kadosh Baruch Hu prays? Because Isaiah tells us, I come to my holy mountain and make them joyful in the house of my prayer. Not their prayer, but my prayer. And what does God pray? Rav Zutra Bar Tovia said in the name of Rav, the same rabbi, incidentally, who says, don't claim your found object at the expense of the poor. He says, God prays, may it be my will that my mercy overcome my anger. And may I enter before my children, guess what? Lifnim meshurat hadin. In other words, God asks for help creating space within the divine circle of justice, a place for our humanity. And when does God say these prayers? Well, during the high holy days. And upon whom does God call for help? Us, people. The text tells us Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, the high priest himself, says he once entered the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur and saw the Kisei Ram v'Nisa, the high and exalted throne, and heard a voice say, B'ni barcheni, bless me, my son. So the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur said to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, may your mercy overcome your anger, and may you enter before your children, lifnim meshurat hadin, less than you can, all that you should. So goes my blessing to you. Shana Tova.